Hi, my name is PJ Finn, and this is my presentation about socialism and the West. How has socialism brought millions of people out of poverty, and what has the West done to stop it? For my presentation, I'm going to be looking at two different successful examples of socialism, and these are Cuba and Burkina Faso. So, starting with Cuba, Cuba was originally colonized by the Spanish in the early 1500s, but it achieved independence in quotation marks, in 1902. This independence was short-lived, as the United States occupied Cuba in 1906 and installed a series of pro-United States dictators that allowed for further exploitation of the island's resources and labor. So now transitioning into the Cuban Revolution, Castro overthrew the United States public government and took power in 1959. While his rule was controversial, what cannot be argued is that the quality of life of Cubans that were in poverty increased under his government. Since 1959, when Castro took power, Cuba's infant mortality rate dropped from 37.3 to 4.3 per 1,000 live births, a rate lower than the United States' 5.8. And life expectancy from 1970 to 2016 rose from 70 years to 78.7 years. And I believe these advancements are even more miraculous when considering the context of Cuba being heavily sanctioned by the entire Western world, and it is a testament to what can be done when resources are not siphoned away by Western corporations and are actually used to benefit the lives of people in poverty. Now transitioning to Burkina Faso and Thomas Sankara. In 1983, Sankara took power in Burkina Faso. He declared that his primary objectives were fighting corruption, fighting environmental degradation, empowering women, and increasing access to education and healthcare, with the larger goal of liquidating imperial domination. And he successfully implemented programs that reduced infant mortality, increased literacy, and boosted the number of women holding government posts. On the environmental front, in the first year of his presidency alone, 10 million trees were planted in an effort to combat desertification. On the first anniversary of the coup that had brought him to power, he changed the country's name from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, which means roughly, land of upright people. And Mosi and Douala, the country's two most widely spoken indigenous languages. In 1987, he was murdered in a military coup that was likely carried out by the French government that had colonized Burkina Faso in 1904 and wanted to continue exploiting the country for economic purposes. He was only 37 years old. Now, talking more broadly about the United States and Western interventions, the Western intervention that murdered Thomas Sankara and put Burkina Faso back into its post-colonial turmoil that allows for easy exploitation, and also talking a little bit about the many attempted coups on Fidel Castro's government that were never fully successful, but the heavy sanctions obviously affected how efficiently Cuba could care for its people. So Western countries, in particular the US, have a long history of overthrowing socialist governments to maintain the global system of exploiting poorer countries for their resources and cheap labor. And a quote from a source I read: "The best evidence for this version comes from the decision to depose the elected government of Guatemala in 1954. Except for President Dwight Eisenhower, every significant decision maker in this case had a family, business, or professional tie to the United Fruit Company, whose interests were adversely affected by an agrarian reform and other policies of the incumbent government." So this is a recurring theme in these interventions. A corporation's profits are hurt by a socialist government that is using the profits that were once going to those corporations and reinvesting it into people in poverty in an effort to help those people. Now, when Western nations see this happen, they are upset with these profits that are no longer going to these Western multinational corporations, and they will often violently overthrow that socialist government and install a dictator, usually, that is kind to Western corporations and is willing to allow for further exploitation of their country. So, and the reasons for doing this include capitalism, US and Western corporate interests, and wanting to maintain control of these formerly colonized nations. And that is the end of my presentation. I will end it with one of my favorite quotes and the end of the Communist Manifesto, Workers of the World Unite by Karl Marx. And this is my works cited.